I thought we'd
Okay.
we have two more shiurim before Pesach,
네, $10.
so we'll do something on Pesach this week and something on Pesach next week. I was at sixes and sevens of how deeply to do this week's shir, but especially because I know people listen to it on the phone, and you don't. It's very hard to know how much an audience can tolerate. But let me just introduce this by saying this: Pesach is the story of every Jew's personal life. These 8 days of Pesach are a blueprint for every Jew's personal experience. And it's much of it is very deep code, and it's criminal that Jews around the world don't get access to their heritage and these codes, because, I mean, Pesach does excite some kind of deep spiritual response in most Jews, because they go to Sidorim. I mean, why would anyone go to a Seder, wait for an hour and a half to eat until he's starving, then get food that isn't his choice, no bread, no comets, and read stuff, a lot of which is meaningless to them? Why do they do that? And what I want to explore with you tonight, and it's a journey. I warn you, and that journey is about personal choice, about the personal choices that we think we make, and when we are free to make them, and what freedom really is. That's what Pesach's about. Pesach is about determining, al pi Torah, what freedom really means, and what choices you really have compared to the triggers that you are subjected to all day, every day. So I just want you to know where the goalposts are. That's where we're going with this. But let's start with this. Pesach, everybody knows it's an 8-day holiday in Golis. So I've been reminded that I have to translate words. So if I forget, someone should put up a hand or give me a sign. But we're going to be using the terms Golus and Geula a lot. Golus means exile. Geula means redemption. You should know that a Jew's life is very much predicated around Golus and Geula, about exile and redemption. We have exile and redemption as a concept and as a spiritual mindset for nearly every day of our lives. I'll explain that in a minute. But let's start with the simple story. The simple story is that Am Yisrael, let's start at the beginning. Yaakov and 70 Jews went into Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is translated in English as Egypt. It's a bad translation for us because it misses the point. Mitzrayim is a word from, it's Loshen Meitzah, it's from the expression Meitzah. Meitzah in Hebrew means bound, constrained, boxed in, unable to move. Mitzrayim in Torah, as we learn, Torah means a place. First of all, obviously everything in Torah, any story in Torah happens at the pshat level, at the ordinary level. But immediately you should be sensitive to the fact that when we're talking about Mitzrayim, we're talking about not only a geographical place where we were in bondage, but a state of being bound. That's the concept of Mitzrayim. So Yaakov and came into Mitzrayim, and Am Yisrael were condemned to be there for 400 years, which turned out to be 210 years, which, because of the way the 400 years is calculated, won't lose time on that. And that was because Avraham Avinu chose Golus rather than a worse alternative. And the first thing to understand before we travel any further is that this story we're going to discuss at various levels. First of all, let's do the simple story level. Am Yisrael goes into Mitzrayim. They become slaves. They have to work very hard. They're oppressed. Then they leave Mitzrayim. What does that mean? They leave Mitzrayim. They have Yitzias Mitzrayim. That word means break out of, escape. That Mitzrayim, which they then. I'm sorry. Before they escape, they witness 10 plagues that Hashem brings, 10 miraculous events. During their sojourn there, they work with bricks to build various things for the Egyptians. They work with hard labor and rigor, but then they finally escape. When they escape, they have Kriyas Yamsuf, they have the crossing of the sea, and then they spend 40 years in the Midbar, in the desert, in which time they have 42 stops in these journeys until they reach Eretz Yisrael. That's the simple story. Everybody understands that. Everybody knows it. And that is the story that we tell Seder night. And for most Jews, sadly, even that story needs some support because they don't even know that story properly. But we're straight away going to change gear and understand that story is a code. You and I are going to have entry into our Mitzrayim, into our state of bondage, whether it's mental bondage or physical bondage or health bondage or other financial bondage. We are going to have a descent into bondage. While we're there, we're going to find that we have to work very hard and that we're often oppressed and we are often subjected to forces beyond our control which are unpleasant. We're going to plumb all of these things in a minute. Am Yisrael had to work with bricks. Bricks is deep code. There's stone and there are bricks. Stone is God created. Bricks is man created. So the labor that we were doing was human labor of building a dira b'taktonim, for those who are more experienced, of building a dwelling place of some kind. We understand it to be a dwelling place for Hashem in this world, which is the lowest of all possible physical worlds. I can't spend too much time on that either, but one should see that this work is code for building the world. And we do that with rigor and hard labor, and then we have miracles, 10 plagues, That means we are exposed during our lifetime to levels of revealed godliness at some level or another. For some people more, for some people less. On some occasions more, some occasions less. If you have a lot of children, you marry them off. If you have a lot of grandchildren, you have a lot of brisses. Whatever it is that is spiritual in your life, there are times when we have that, and that is a prelude to our being able to escape our bondage, whatever that is. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. Well, I'm not going to explain. I'm going to repeat to you the Hasidus on it. Then when we have our Yitzias Mitzrayim, when we escape our level of bondage, there's going to be the goal is Eretz Yisrael, which means a level of serenity, a level of nachas, a level of satisfaction, of achievement, and that will come after 42 stops. We have every Jew has the same 42 stops, just at different times and different quality, different levels of ability to identify those stops. At one point or other in our life, we're going to have a Kriyas Yamsuf. We're going to have the sea part, and we're going to, and I'll explain what that means if we get time, and then hopefully end up in our own Eretz Yisrael, our own state of satisfaction and achievement. Now, you've got to remember, 4/5 of Jews didn't leave Mitzrayim. 4/5 of Jews stayed voluntarily. So this dynamic, which I'm going to be trying to explain through the Shir tonight, doesn't apply to all Jews, because many Jews don't inquire about it, or don't have the opportunity to hear any of this. And that's the saddest thing. That's why the Rebbe sent shluchim all over the world to teach Jews Torah for people like me, who 55 years ago I'd never heard of Pesach. But for those Jews who do know something, and who are prepared to open their minds and their hearts and their souls to what this information is, all of a sudden, a whole new, it's not a new world that's open, it's a whole new universe that's open, set of universes that's open. Because all of a sudden, it becomes possible not only to make sense of your life as a whole, but your life in slices, in periods of time. And the code for the proof of that is that every day in davening we have to say over Yitzias Mitzrayim. And why do we say it every day? Because a Jew faces this dynamic every day. Every day of your life and my life, we are going to have periods of time when we're in our Mitzrayim, when we are tied down, fetched, closed in, boxed in, unable to move. And we're going to have times in our day when we are liberated from that. We're going to have times in our day when we're flying, when we're experiencing our own personal miracles. And we're going to have times in our day when we have to work very hard, and we don't see the reward for the effort. But one thing is certain: if you understand this dynamic, the story of Pesach properly, and if you apply it to yourself properly, and you work with it through your life properly, then what happens is that the periods of being in Golus, in exile, which is what Mitzrayim means, and the periods of Geula, redemption, become completely different. The periods of time in Mitzrayim are less, and the times of Geula are more. And many people will testify to this. I mean, people who begin to learn Torah and begin to learn Hasidus will testify that their lives are different the more they understand the Hasidus of what we're learning. So that's the big picture of what Pesach is really about. Pesach is really about facing the fact that you and I are going to be boxed in and constrained a period of time in our lives, a period of time in our years, months, weeks, days, and there is a method of breaking out of that, and there's a method of traveling towards our destiny, and there is a method of achieving that destiny. And that is really what Geula means, what redemption means. Redemption doesn't mean that you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Life is a snack, it's easy. You're beautiful, you're rich, you've never had a problem in your life. That's not a Jew's life. A Jew's life is difficult. Our history is a difficult history. And each Jew's history is a difficult history. But with that difficulty comes the enormous prize of growth to an extent way beyond where you left off, where one starts off. So, in order to understand that, I'm going to revise a series of concepts that we learn in Hasidus all the time. I'll try and do it as quickly and briefly as possible. And for those people who know all this backwards because of exposure to it often, I'm not apologizing, because everybody needs to review this from time to time anyway. So let's start with this. Everything in creation has a guf and a neshama, a body and a soul. Humanity is a higher level of creation than everything else, in the sense that everything else in the world was created in one step, and humanity was created in two steps. Everything else, Hashem spoke and said, let there be light, and there's light. One step. With animals, let there be animals, there are animals. With a human being, Hashem gathered together the earth, and that's step one. That's Gashmias. That means that you and I are a combination of physicality, and into that earth he breathed or blew Nishmas Chaim, which means a breath of life. That's how it's usually translated, and that is the spiritual content of a human being. So a human being, unlike everything else in creation, is part physical and part spiritual. There's, by the way, a biological proof for this, which a doctor will understand. All the automatic machinations of a body, like digestion, like food being entering into the blood supply, nourishment, saliva, all the natural bodily functions that happen automatically happen beyond our control. You can't sit at the table and say, I choose to digest more at the moment. You can't do that. Digestion is beyond your control, right? The one thing that is automatic and also available to you by choice is breathing. That is the one bodily function which happens, I have a friend who had a daughter with very bad panic attacks. And one of the things she explained to her doctor was that she was frightened that she would stop breathing. So he dealt with it very harshly but very cleverly. He explained to her, you can't. And if you want to, try. Just try and you'll see what happens. Stop breathing and you'll see what happens. Stop breathing, you faint, right? And then breathing takes over. Breathing is automatic, but it's the one bodily function which is automatic that we can also adjust. We can also want to breathe or not want to breathe deeply or not breathe deeply, etc. Why? Because that's the physical manifestation of this nishmas chayim, of this breath of life. So you have a body and you have a soul. And we call the soul the neshama. It's called a nefesh, which means a life force. In Jews, it's called a neshama, and it's an extra level to that life force. It's not better or worse. I'm not going to spend time on that now, but know that every Jew has a soul called a neshama. And we need to understand how that neshama is structured. I'm sure we've done this many times in many shurim. I'm sure many people have heard this, but we need it for this year. So the neshama is made up of two things. It's made up of the koiches of the neshama, which are 10. There are 10 koiches of the neshama, which are koiches means strengths and weaknesses of the neshama. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then we have what are called levushim, garments of the neshama. The neshama wears clothes the same way as a body wears clothes. Everything in creation is a manifestation of everything. Everything is just repeating itself from a more spiritual level to a more physical level. So the fact that a body wears clothes is only a physical manifestation of the fact that a soul wears clothes. What are the clothes of the soul? Machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh. Thought, speech, and action. When you think, that's not your soul. That's a garment of your soul. A less internal garment is when you speak, and a less internal garment again is action. Thought, speech, and action are the clothing of the soul. Now, it's very important to understand this is a whole different set of shurim on its own, but I just need to register with everybody so that we know everybody knows where this is going. The koiches of the neshama, which are made up of 10 levels, as I've said, 3 of them are mental, 7 of them are emotional, not mental, intellectual. And 7 of them are emotional. The intellectual ones are called Chokmah, Bina, and Das, which I'm going to explain in a moment because we have to have this on board. And then there are 7 levels of emotion, Hesed, Gevurah, etc., etc., kindness, strictness, etc. The one thing, don't worry about it, that's an alarm clock I don't know how to turn off.
Don't worry.
Every one of us is born with unique 10 levels in our respective neshamas. No 2 neshamas are the same. Everybody has a different level of intellect, a different level of emotion. Some people are kinder, some people are, and we're hardwired to the neshama that we have. The soul that we have is given to us by Hashem, hardwired. You've got no choice in it. Just like you got no choice when you were born, what century you were born, what gender you were born. Although people are trying to interfere with this, but let's just understand that in its essence, you have no Vayikra, no choice in in these things. In the same thing, you have no choice in your neshama. And let me tell you something else. In your whole lifetime, and in my whole lifetime, we will never get to meet our neshama. You'll never be able to describe anything about your neshama. Just like we have an obligation to know God, all we can do is know the products of revealed godliness, but we don't know anything about God himself, about God's essence. Same thing with the neshama, because everything in physicality is a product of a spiritual source. So you and I will never know anything about our neshama other than it's hardwired with 10 levels, 3 levels of intellect and 7 levels of emotion. And we can never change any of those. So let's pretend you're born, the example I like to use is you're born absolutely stingy, right? Miserly. It's like tearing off flesh. If someone asks you to give him $1, he's starving. And for you to give him that $1, it's like tearing off flesh. There are people like that, never. So let's use that as an example. That man is going to be born, live his life, and die a miser. However, although he can't change that because he's hardwired for that, he can change his levushim, he can change his garments. So if he, by his thought and his speech and his action, begins to give tzedakah and forces himself to give tzedakah every day, and a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, he can die, and on his tombstone will be written, "Here lies the biggest Baal tzedakah of our community," and no one will know that really, in his essence, the guy was a miser all his life. Now that man who on his gravestone says that is such a great Baal tzedakah, who is such a miser in his soul, he's a hero. That is Jewish heroism. We are born into Mitzrayim. You have to understand this. We are this pattern is a it's a pathology for your life. You're born with certain koiches, born with certain abilities. Some people are tall, some people are strong, some people are weak, some people are clever, some people are stupid, some people are kind, some people are cruel. But it's not a death sentence. What it is ammunition for you and me to escape that Mitzrayim and find Eretz Yisrael. To escape that bondage with the effort of using the levushim that are the garments that our neshama has, to change our nature to be worthy of entry into Eretz Yisrael. And then you spend the achievement part of your life in your Eretz Yisrael, which we'll come to in a minute. So, l'chaim. I've got to load you up with quite a lot, otherwise we're just not going to be able to deal with the punchline together. 3 of those levels that our soul is hardwired with are intellectual. Those 3, I have to repeat for those that need it repeated. They are divided into 3, Chokhmah, Binah, and Das. Now, I'm going to give you a quick example of the difference between all 3. Let's go back to medicine. Let's pretend you were a doctor in 1955 and you have a general practice and you notice that a lot of the people in your waiting room who are coughing smoke. You notice that, right? And you then have an idea, maybe smoking and coughing, or smoking and breathing, are connected. That first thought is called Chokhmah. That means it's an idea. It has no length and breadth or anything. It's just an idea. I've just got an idea. Maybe smoking and emphysema are connected. That's called Chokhmah. We all react in many ways at a Chokhmah level to various things. Then comes Bina. What does Bina mean? Bina means, let's go back to our doctor, and our doctor says to himself, do me a favor, Alex, close the door. Do you mind to close the door?
Yeah.
Bina means that the doctor says, you know what, I want to check this idea. I'm going to keep a list of everyone in my waiting room that coughs, and a list of everyone in my waiting room that has breathing problems, and see if there's an actual correlation, what the statistical correlation is. And then he prepares a sophisticated correlation, and what does he find? He finds, indeed, that the number of people with respiratory problems are very, very much more smokers than non-smokers. So that's Bina. But now, let's say this doctor is a smoker. Here's the $64 billion question. Does he stop smoking? Answer, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Why not? Now you have to understand this terminology. The reason he doesn't necessarily stop smoking is that he doesn't have das in smoking. He's got the Chokhmah because he had the idea. He's got the Bina because he's gone to the trouble of measuring it. And if it's not him, then you and I will read it in the paper. We'll read in the paper, link being found between respiratory disease and smoking. So that's your Chokhmah. You've just suddenly got it for the first time. But then you think, is this really true? So I'm going to check it. So you access the information. You've got the Bina. Do you necessarily stop smoking? No. Why not? Because you don't have the das. If you do have the das, there will be a behavioral change. There will be a change in your behavior, or in your perspective. Yes, in your perspective, which therefore is your behavior. That's called das. I'm going to try and get you to the point by the end of the shir where you will understand that Golus for a Jew is exile of one's das. Das in what? Das in godliness. We'll come to it. It's too early. But at the moment I need you to understand what das is. Das is not just the information that smoking and respiratory disease are connected, not the proof of it, but how it affects you so that it's in your kishkas, so that it's impossible for you to smoke anymore, because you now understand that it's suicide. And what normal person wants to commit suicide? So that's what das means. One more piece we need. Every one of these neshamas that we have are divided into two. You have a nefesh elokis and a nefesh habamis. You have an animal soul and a godly soul. The animal soul processes daily living. It processes fear. A car's coming at you, you jump out of the way. It processes the need to satisfy hunger, the need to satisfy thirst, the need to work to get money for a job, whatever it is. That's your nefesh habamis working. The nefesh habamis spawns a thing called yetzer hara, which means a desire for bad. What's bad? Something contrary to Torah and mitzvahs. Then we each have a nefesh elokis, a godly soul. And the godly soul spawns a yetzer toiv, a desire for good. What's good? That which is consistent with Torah and mitzvahs. Now, each of us have that in our neshama, and it's in equal parts. You've got to understand this. It's in exactly equal parts. Otherwise, there'd be no battle. And the battle is from the date of birth to the date of death between your nefesh habahamis and your nefesh elokis. The nefesh habahamis isn't bad. It's just solving daily problems. It can have bad, and that's why it's got a yetzer hara. The nefesh elokis is good, and it is your gateway to your experience with connecting with your God. That's what the nefesh elokis is. It's termed to be a helek elokah mimal, which means a part of God Himself. We share a common consciousness with our God in our nefesh elokis, in our godly soul. Now, you should know that of the 8 billion nefoshos approximately on this planet, we don't count Jews, but the million of Jews who are sitting around this table at the moment, a million plus of Jews sitting around the table at the moment, you would represent an impossibly tiny proportion of people who've even heard this information, let alone for whom it's das. Most people don't know anything about their souls. Most people don't know anything about Chokmah, Binah, and Das and 7 levels of emotion, and they don't know that they've got a nefesh elokis and a nefesh habahamis. They don't know any of this. They just stumble through life from one trigger to the next. We're going to come to triggers in a minute. And those triggers you're totally innocent to them, because some triggers are caused by birth. You're born, for example, not clever. And you're put in a class with only clever kids, let's pretend, and from the age of 3 to the age of 5, everybody does nothing but laugh at you because you can't understand what they are understanding. Do you understand that for the rest of your life, there are going to be triggers that when somebody says something, it'll take you back to those years, and you're angry. Now, anger is something that we have to beat, because anger is really avodah zarah. This is too difficult for this year at the moment. I'll just tell you quickly for those that understand it. If you believe in Hashgacha Pratis properly, then you understand that whatever happens to you is by design, and if it's by design, by godly design, there's no room for anger. And if you are angry, it's because you're really blaming circumstances that have harmed you without understanding that those circumstances are God-driven. And if you're blaming circumstances which aren't God-driven, that's avodah zarah, that's idol worship. This part's too hard. Let's just leave that. But what is important to understand is that we are governed by triggers for our soul. That our soul, which we've agreed is hardwired with certain koiches, with certain abilities, certain disabilities, certain strengths, certain weaknesses, they are going to be triggered by stimuli. Some of those stimuli you'll be triggered because of the nature with which you were born, with the neshama and the body that you were born. And for example, if you're born with no legs, or God forbid something's wrong with your legs, you can't run in a marathon. And if somebody forces you to run in a marathon, it's sadism. On the other hand, there are certain things that you are born with as abilities, and it now becomes your duty and your responsibility to exploit those talents and those and build triggers to exploit those talents. Now, also, triggers come not only from birth, as everybody knows. It's not all nature, it's nurture as well. So the environment in which you live, the experiences which you have, all add to these triggers. But one thing we have to get clear tonight before you leave this table, otherwise the whole thing's been a waste of time. All these triggers are your and my Mitzrayim. All these triggers are coming to us by force, by imposition, whatever the trigger is. You are not sitting down and saying, I choose this trigger. You're the victim of this trigger. And being a victim of anything is not for us. We Jews, that's not our life. That's not why Hashem created a universe with 400 billion galaxies in it, with a complex system of universes and solar system and Earth and ecology and brain and humanity, which has the capacity to dream and grow and build and imagine. All of this is for potential greatness, and that potential greatness is realized by not being a victim of triggers, but by being in charge of one's own destiny. And being in charge of one's own destiny is one's geula, is one's redemption. And not being in charge of one's destiny is golus, is exile. And Pesach is when we let me go back a step. When we keep a yontif, it's not like the Queen's birthday, or now the King's birthday, or whatever it is, or Labor Day, Queen's yontif. It's not. That's not why we keep a yontif. We keep a yontif because on yontif, the spiritual power of that yontif is shining specifically, and we have access to drink that elixir and take it into the whole year. I'll give you a simple example that happened today by Ashkoka Protis. I learned with my Chavrusa, we learn a letter from the Rebbe before we start our Seder in Chassidus. And the letter this morning was about a man who came who said thank you very much to the Rebbe he came to the Farbrengen on Simchas Torah, and the Rebbe writes to him that he's got his letter, and he was grateful for the communication, but he noticed that he left early. Now you got to understand what 770 was like. There's 5,000 people in there. He'd never seen this guy before in his life, and the Rebbe noticed that he left early. So the Rebbe felt it necessary to summarize for him what he didn't hear after he left. Can you believe this? I learned this letter with Lena this morning, right? So he summarizes it for him, and he says, Simchas Torah is a yontif of simcha, of joy. And the purpose of celebrating Simchas Torah is to take that level of joy and dig it into the rest of the year. It's not just a holiday to eat and drink and dance. It's a holiday to expose yourself to the essence of the holiday. The essence of the holiday is simcha. And in order to, and you take from that and take it into the year. And then he says to this man, and I need you to understand that simcha, joy, is the driver of brachas for health, money, and children. Right? In other words, and therefore, if you want to ask me for a bracha, which is obviously what this man did in the letter, you should know that you can generate this brocha by simcha. Okay? Now, that is not a trigger. That is a man in charge of his destiny. If he can do that, if he can understand that, and if he can bring a level of joy to bear in his life without changing what's happening to him. You've got to understand this. We're not in charge of what happens to us. What happens to us is Hashgacha Pratis, is divine providence. How we react to it, we have free choice. Now, that free choice can be to be imprisoned by it and to be in Mitzrayim, or to not be imprisoned by it and not be in Mitzrayim, but to have Geula. Now, how do you have that? This is very difficult, guys, and you're not going to walk out of this room, and I'm not going to walk out of this room and we'll snap our fingers and do it. This is a lifetime in the spiritual gym. But the answer to that is explained by our Rebbeim as this, that the difference between being the victim of these triggers and being in charge of what happens with those triggers is to have das in Elokus. That means this level of das in godliness. What does that mean? You go back to first principles. Let's say there's a trigger. There's a trigger that something bad has happened to you in the last year, weeks, decade, every day. And you have this same thing that's torturing you at some level or another. And you get and instead of being triggered by that happenstance, you go back to first principles and you say, do I believe in God? Yes. Did God create the world? Yes. Is he recreating it every minute? Yes. That's what we learn in Chassidus. As he's recreating it every minute, does that mean that he has control over everything? If he's creating everything every minute, it entails control. So if it entails control, does that mean that he's controlling what's happening to me? Yes, it does. And if he's controlling what's happening to me, do we learn that nothing bad comes from Hashem? Yes, we do. So therefore, what is happening to me at the moment must be for my benefit at one level or another. If it's for my benefit for one level or another, my job at the moment is to try and understand that and hug my God. And the moment I hug my God, I'm not a victim to the trigger. You're asking me, is this difficult? Of course it's difficult. 4/5 of the Jews didn't leave Mitzrayim. 4/5 of the Jews stayed. And of the 1/5 that left, you think it was easy? Do you think they got to Eretz Yisrael in one leap? They left Kremnizer Shir, and next week is Pesach, and we're flying for the rest of my life. Think it was so easy? They had to witness the plagues. They had to witness Kriyas Yam Suf, which we'll come to in a minute if we get time. They had to have 40 years in the Midbar, in the desert, 42 stages between Mitzrayim and Eretz Yisrael. But finally, Am Yisrael has Eretz Yisrael. And much more than that, they convert Eretz Canaan into Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Canaan and Eretz Yisrael have exactly the same geographical boundaries. What's the difference? One is life responding to triggers, Golis, and one is life not responding to triggers, but having das in Elokus, having das in godliness. And that level of das in godliness brings you to a new term. And this is the term that we celebrate on Pesach, and that term is freedom. Now, much is made of this. You'll sit down at the Seder and somebody will introduce something at the table and they'll say, we're celebrating our freedom, right? Now that may be true in Sydney, Australia, if you can afford the Seder. But what about a Jew in Auschwitz on Seder night? Is it possible for a Jew to be free in Auschwitz on Seder night? The answer is depends on his mental condition. If he is the product of the triggers, what freedom is there? He's in jail, he's suffering, he's deprived. But if he goes back to first principles and he has a relationship with his God, and everything that comes from God is for the good. He doesn't see it yet, he will. And if he doesn't, so what? But he has a relationship with his God. He has a private dialogue with his God. His neshama is in tune with his God. He's indestructible and free. He's not constrained by the barracks. Would we rather be in Sydney? Of course. But real freedom is the ability for you to accept godliness for yourself as a matter of das. Private acceptance as a matter of das. In the same way as it becomes impossible for you to smoke anymore once you have the information of the emphysema and the statistics, and then you make the decision that you don't want to die, so you're not going to smoke anymore. That same das needs to be cultivated in your and my relationship with our God. And with that das, you're completely free. There is no constraint. Mitzrayim is defined as no das in Elokus. That's what Mitzrayim is. At its deepest level. And it's very difficult. I'm not suggesting that any of this is easy. First of all, it's not easy to understand. Second of all, it's very much harder to accomplish. And it takes time and effort. But understand the difference in life. Instead of being pushed pillar to post by happenstance every day, suddenly you're the driver of your life. And not only the driver of your life, but the driver of the welfare of you and your family and your country and the earth and the world. And every Jew becomes a personal hero. And that's what Pesach is. That's what we celebrate Pesach. We celebrate Pesach to tune into the spiritual potential of this level of freedom. In other words, that we can put something between the trigger and the action. There's a trigger and let me tell you something very interesting, fascinating thing. Probably should have started the shir with it. Maybe we should spend another whole shir on it. Paro, when Moshe Rabbeinu was told to go to Paro and ask him to tell him to let his people go to serve him in the Midbar. So on 3 occasions, Hashem says to Moshe, before 3 of the plagues, he says that you'll tell him that I'm bringing such and such a plague, but he won't let you go because I will harden his heart. Familiar with that terminology? Now, and the Meforshim all have a fantastic question, very simple question, right? If Hashem's hardening his heart, what are you blaming him for? If he has no choice, how can you blame him? Right? Our concept of reward and punishment entails choice. Otherwise, it's not fair. It's sadism. If to punish somebody, if you set him up for failure, you force him to fail, how can you punish him? Is that a good question? So, The Meforshim, Rashi explains and the Rambam explains that the word isn't hardens, the word is strengthens. The actual word in Hebrew is strengthens. And Rashi and Rambam explains that what was God doing? He was actually strengthening his level of choice. That notwithstanding there would be miracles, he's not going to cave into the miracle. He'll still have a level of choice. Right? So we learn like this, that you have a trigger, you have an action, and in between that, sometimes you have a level of choice. Not all the time. So why do animals have a level of choice? They have no level of choice, right? They have no das. An animal has no das. A child has no das. It says kotne ein lui das. A child has no das. He has intellect, but he doesn't have das, so he can't make a choice. He has a trigger: ice cream, good. Smile, laugh. Take it away, cry. That's, and there is nothing in between the trigger and the action. That's Golus, and that's why Paro is regarded as such a negative. Geula is that there is something in between the trigger and the action. What is there in between the trigger and the action? Your choice. But not a choice based on previous triggers, because that looks like choice, but it's not choice. It's really a forced result. If you're beaten up by your father all your life, then when you see a father figure, you're going to feel fear. That's not a choice. That's a trigger. But for that person to reach a level of no fear, that's a choice. And that is the peace between the trigger and the action. And that peace for Geula, for redemption, is das in godliness. And if a Jew has das in godliness, he is free. And that's what we celebrate in Pesach. So when you read the Haggadah, and you'll read the story, and you'll read, the whole story will unfold. But hear it now with a different language, with a different musical score. Anyway, to be continued next week. L'chaim. L'chaim. L'chaim.
Same.
Okay.